Hey,
Hey, and
good
I'm
to see
sure
you, sir.
that it's nice to see you too. And I'm sure that Alfonso will jump in soon enough.
Hmm.
All right. I gotta mute that. That's for sure. There we go. Yeah, I've got a couple of things running at the same time there. So no, that is good. I hope you are quite well, Brandon.
Doing really well,
Um,
sir.
awesome. Let me just pull up what I have to pull up here. I gotta shift over a couple tabs and we will be
That's what I'm
good.
doing.
Up, looks like I just heard Alfonso ding. So let's try to get that going. What the heck? Sometimes this
I'm glad he's I'm glad he's
Zoom
willing to
thing.
do this short notice. I think it'd be awesome.
Me too. Me too. All right, folks. I am Tim Freitas from the Garden of English. I am here with the one and only Brandon Abden and the one and only Alfonso Correa. And we are going to talk about this year's AP Lang prompts. Please note, folks, that this is not Alfonso. Amazing to see you. I'm just giving my little spiel and then I'll let you talk and tell everybody who you are and all that awesome stuff. But I'm here with Brandon and Alfonso. We're going to talk about the 2023 AP Lang Prompt Set 2. If there are a bunch of people that are dying to get us to talk about Set 1, perhaps I could convince Brandon and Alfonso to come back sometime next week or the week after. But who knows? The real thing we want to talk about, though, is this. This is not an official AP sanctioned event, so I don't want anybody to think that we are speaking in any capacity for the College Board. We are not. What we're doing is we're looking at the prompts and we're saying, as teachers, what are ways that we would get kids to interact with the prompt? What are things that we could potentially do in our classrooms for next year to use these prompts in our classroom? And then just kind of giving a general sense of how we felt about things. Brandon worded a very strong text to me today about one of the prompts. And so we can happily talk about that as well. But before I pull the prompts up on the screen, I want to just let Brandon and Alfonso speak for themselves. So Alfonso, tell us who you are, where you're from, and what you do. Brandon, you take over right after that, and then we'll get right into looking at prompts here today.
Hey, everybody. My name is Alfonso Correa, and I teach in Dallas. This is my, 27th year. Taught AP for a while. Worked with AP, the AP program and AP Lang specifically for quite some time. Kind of up and down the gamut of responsibilities. Development committee, IDT, and leadership at the reading. This year, I'll be the assistant to the chief reader again, and I had the distinct privilege to work with Brandon during the redesign, during the framework rollout, and Tim was also part of that, and our fabulous time putting together the rubrics. That was probably the most fun anyone has ever had. So anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell what we're doing so far.
Awesome. Brandon, tell us about you here tonight. What about you, Brandon? What are you doing with your days?
Well, right now I'm trying to figure out if Alfonso is being sarcastic in his comments about the rubrics, because I tried to make it as fun as I possibly could.
It was.
I'm just saying. Maybe the evenings were fun. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Right. So, no, hi, everyone. I'm Brandon Abden. I live in Western Kentucky. I'm sitting in my backyard. I just finished, doing some mulch and working in my garden. And, so I'm on Central Time, along with Alfonso. So it's still a little bit more daylight here. That's nice. But I'm originally from Eastern Kentucky. I had taught at the University of Kentucky. I taught at Georgia State. I taught high school for 14 years, Lang and Lit. I got to spend some time working at the College Board as a director of English. That's where I got to meet Alfonso and Tim in different capacities, and I've been able to maintain those relationships. It's been great.
Then we did that weird thing, like write a textbook about AP Lang. What were we thinking?
I know. Like you and I thought we had time for that. But yeah, me and you and Ms. Lauren Peterson, who's not with us tonight, but she, we did some great work with that. And Alfonso does some of his own work working with texts and things too. So
I was thinking about another one, Brandon. That's all I'm going to toss out there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're working on the writing companion too. I think we'll more to come on that. But
Yeah.
I mean, this is what I do now. I work with teachers. I work with schools all over the country, and I'm really excited to get to do it. And I'm excited to talk about these prompts as always.
Excellent. So just so anybody knows, if you want to chime in with anything, and if you have anything that you want to add to the conversation or say, by all means, you can place that in the chat. I do anticipate that a decent amount of people will watch this after. Also, for adults, it appears as though Brandon, for those of you older than 21, Brandon is partaking in a delicious adult beverage. I'm just drinking a seltzer though. And please note, if there are students watching, we are not advocating underage drinking. Please drink responsibly.
Nope, I am not underage, I promise.
Yes. So anyway, nonetheless, please also know if you want to chime in with the conversation, you do have to be a subscriber in order to put something in the chat. So just if you're like, I'm trying to type in there, but it's not working, that's because it just limits it to subscribers to the channel. You just press the subscribe button and then you can toss that right in. But yeah, we're happy.
Tim, they can always unsubscribe after the video if they want to. Right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
yeah. Why support the Garden of English? Makes, especially for free. I totally understand.
I mean, but it'd be great to hear from people, and you drop it, who you are, where you're from. It's always wonderful to hear from people.
Absolutely. So. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share up my screen so that we can look at these prompts together. I would like to point out that although I know the topics of the prompt, I have purposely held off on reading both the lit prompts last night. Oh, Alfonso as well. Anyway, I have purposely held off on reading the prompts like I did for lit last night and laying tonight, so that I was actually having my first exposure to them as we talked about these and things that we could do with kids. You will notice if you click on the description, the video description underneath this particular video, that you will get a link to the prompts themselves. So please, on AP Central. So they're right there. These are publicly released prompts. There's nothing that we're trying to give to the public that is not actually publicly there. So I'm going to share up my screen, and we're going to get these prompts up on the screen, and we'll start taking a look. So I've got my screen here, and we are going to click on set 2 because this was the handwritten prompt for people that took the handwritten exam. Now, Alfonso, did your students take the handwritten exam, or did your students take the electronic exam?
We chose the handwritten exam. All
right. Excellent. We chose that too. I actually told my AP coordinator, I said, as long as that exists, please promise me that you will choose that.
Mm-hmm.
I just think about everything that could potentially go wrong with technology, and I know that sometimes it can't. I mean, sometimes people had great success, but there's the pen and the paper, I think, is better for annotation, and I think there's less risk of the internet going down or lightning striking the building or anything like that as well. So here we go. AP English Language and Composition Set 2. We will start with this synthesis question. So the first thing that we always talk about when we do these is, how do we get kids to approach the prompt well? I will read the prompt. Brandon and Alfonso, you take it away. I'll toss in things that I would do. But I also want you to just consider, what other readings can you think of, even off the top of your head, right, when you talk about breaking into the prompt, that you could pair this with in your classroom to help kids kind of create a larger synthesis to teach this next year. Okay, so here we go. The prompt: vertical farms are indoor agricultural facilities in which plants are grown, often in a hydroponic, soilless environment on tall stacks of shelves. Plants are given water, nutrients, and light, mostly through automated processes. Advocates say that vertical farms are key to providing food for the future, yielding high-quality produce while making efficient use of land and water. Critics warn about the energy consumption associated with vertical farms' automated processes, as well as problems related to cost and nutritional value. Carefully read the following 6 sources, including the introductory information for each source. Write an essay that synthesizes material from at least 3 of the sources and develops your position on the value, if any, of vertical farms to the future of agriculture. Alfonso or Brandon, take it away. What are we doing with this prompt? And then how are we getting our kids to approach it as we teach them how to do this next year?
Alfonso, please do something with this.
No shortage of additional readings to use in your classroom, right? You can run the gamut here from climate science to opinion pieces about climate science to local pieces, local and state level legislation, articles about, not legislation itself, but I mean, articles about legislation, describing it, arguing for or against it. Again, we're looking for those multiple perspectives, right? And that's kind of the idea here, is to have multiple perspectives. Well, one of the things I always encourage my kids to do is to think about any of these prompts, every single one of them, as trying to dig out, or trying to get you to dig out the complexity, right? What's the complexity? What's the nuance, right? Because that's always, because the easy thing is like, oh, vertical farms, who cares? Well, technically, our kids are supposed to care where they're sitting for the exam. That's a thing, right? But that's
Yeah.
right. Technically, that's what you're supposed to do. But still, right? When we think about complexity and nuance, right? Something like eminent domain, right? A few years ago, I'm partial to that because I was a question leader, but a lot of kids talked about, their local community, right? And how those things impacted their local community, right? That's the kind of buy-in you need, right?
Yeah.
And that's encouraging kids to do that, not only through these sources, but then through the additional readings. That's really how you get them to establish a position, right? And really get used to the idea that they have to have a position, right? And when they do that and create an argument from that, then there's a more rich conversation that they can have.
Mm-hmm. All right, Brandon, what are you doing with this?
Well, I mean, I love what Alfonso is saying about developing a position. The way I approach this with students is the way I approach synthesis period with students is giving them the prompt first and having them shape an argument.
Yeah.
Now, we could have lots of long, nerdy conversations about how that's not really research, but I would argue that the synthesis question is not really research anyway. But that's a different discussion. It's not meant to demonstrate research skills. It's meant to demonstrate skills with integrating sources and evidence, which are things you do during research, but it's not a research task.
Right.
That having been said, I understand, this is the message I sent to Tim earlier. I understand, I've been in it. I know Alfonso's been in it. When these prompts have to be accessible, they have to be as white bread as they can be, so that we don't take a chance of offending or upsetting certain people. Mm-hmm. Totally understand. I'm all for that, as from an equity standpoint, from a political standpoint, centric, everything else. Some of them are snoozers. This one, oh my gosh, I'm reading, I'm like, oh, wow. And so, it's a great opportunity to talk to kids about how they have to find a big idea. They have to find something. They don't give a darn about, most of them don't give a darn about vertical farms. Now, the school where I taught, one of the schools where I taught, we had, FFA. I had brilliant kids in FFA, kids who were giving speeches. President of the state president of the Future Farmers of America was sitting in my AP class. She could have done a great paper on this, and it would have been brilliant. I mean, she probably knew as much as the sources could bring in about something like this, no doubt. But a lot of kids are going to have to really look for the ideas here, the ideas that Alfonso touches on, bringing in another text of environmentalism, of agriculture and other things. And then the prompt gives us some of these things too, talking about automated agriculture in the future and energy consumption. And so there's certainly ideas for kids to grab a hold of here, and complexities for kids to grab a hold of. And that's where I would start with the prompt. So start digging into this and help them realize, hey, you're going to write about that idea through the lens of vertical farms.
Right. And, one of the ways that I make my students approach the prompt is they always have to find ideas in the prompt, because they have to write their essays about ideas instead of things. Right. Yep. So I know that they're writing about agricultural indoor farming, this idea of the vertical farm. However, my students would actually go to the prompt, and what they would look for is they would see most efficient land and water use. So they would think about efficiency in terms of environmental efficiency. And then they would look at where it says energy consumption and automation. So my kids would write out automation, energy consumption, and efficiency and sustainability. And they would put those words right in this white space here. Yep. And then when they would go and read their sources, now we're not going to read every source word for word, but when they would go and read those sources, they would then say which sources relate to which ideas. And that's how they would actually create their conversations for their complexities, as opposed to just saying, I have to write about these kind of farms. So that's how I teach my kids to approach the prompt when you get things that are potentially snoozers. Now, ironically enough, I didn't have such an adverse reaction to this one. I'd have a more adverse reaction to eminent domain. And I think one of the reasons why I didn't have such an adverse reaction to this is because in Massachusetts, and I don't know if this is the same where you all live, but in Massachusetts, because marijuana is legalized, everywhere that you see these buildings going up of hydroponic, places for this, right? So I know that kids have at least seen this, and I'm not encouraging marijuana use or anything like that. That is not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that as kids search for experiences to kind of correlate with an understanding of like what this entails, there are so many dispensaries that go up in Massachusetts. You can't go like 2 feet without them, and you see the building go up with it. And so because of that, I think that there's this kind of like understanding, oh my word, there's entire productions going on in these buildings that we can't even see that look this way. The only other thing that I wanted to mention here too was that I would love to pair this with, I can't remember, I think it's chapter 1 of Brave New World, but it might be chapter 2. So I would read chapter 1 or chapter 2 of Brave New World, where they actually do the automation of how they create the classes of the people in the embryonic sacs that are filled with, pig blood surrogate and whatnot. That's chapter 2. And then the structure of that chapter is also very much assembly line-ish. So if I were going to my classroom next year, I would say, good, this reproduction is starting with plants and food, saying it's a good idea, but where does this actually go? And then I hope I have a kid that says this is a slippery slope fallacy, which is potentially so. Unfortunately, most slippery slopes that people claim on any political dance floor on either side of the aisle end up becoming true. So it's really a beautiful conversation that you can have on about the wider concept of what is actually going on with the automation of natural processes as we look at how life functions. And you could really do something cool with that in your piece.
Well, I realized I totally skirted by your comment about your request about what text we could pair this with. And Alfonso answered it really well. There's so many that I could do, but one that comes to mind that was always really successful with my students is there's an essay by a guy named Jared Diamond. He wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel. And he's not the greatest writer, but he's got some really interesting ideas. But he has this essay called, and I put the link to it in the chat just a moment ago. But he's got an essay called "The Worst Invention in the History of Mankind," and the worst invention to him is agriculture, like the problems it has created, and the environmental problems, the social problems, the inequities, things like that. And of course, he's not saying we should throw it all out. He's approaching this from a historian's viewpoint. And so I thought that would be a really interesting essay to pair with this. Yeah,
somebody dropped something in the chat as well. And now I'm thinking about like the Dust Bowl and the agricultural practices that influence that. I mean, we could make this, I think that if I'm going to use this in my classroom, I am going to try to make it something that is agriculturally pertinent to my area, right? And one of the things about Massachusetts is that we are incredibly well populated. There's just no doubt about it. And, this idea, the farmland is getting, snatched up for developments out the wazoo. So I think that, I could very easily bring this right into my area. And depending on where you are, I think that, look at the farming issues and agricultural issues that are right in your area and bring that into this conversation, and let's see what the kids actually jump on instead of having a kind of a snoozer.
Going back to your idea of automation and sustainability, right? All of the things you guys were just talking about, even if you're thinking about that on a local level, right? The idea, right? The bigger idea is that idea of automation versus sustainability. right?
Right.
Because that's the big idea, right? So that's huge, right?
That's a great,
And
great
you know,
point.
kind of, and thinking about, for example, the source here, the last source, I thought that was really, really, really not necessarily a tricky one, but kind of the most, you know, the biggest one, right? When we think about, hey, look, we don't have enough land to sustain land use to feed people. We're going to run out, right? That's a finite resource. And you know, that comparison that's done in that last source is really kind of bringing out that idea of sustainability, right? You know, so that kind of encourages the perspective of we need to do something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, it's interesting because I think about, ironically enough, if I were to go there, I could actually, oh, sorry, Alfonso, you might have cut out.
Oops, sorry. Did I?
I think you did. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Alfonso. I thought you were done. So I was like, oh, let me dig in on that. I missed like the last 5 seconds of what you had to say.
No. I think, you know, kind of, again, like I said, bringing it back, right, to that bigger idea, and you know, just having kids understand that they're dealing with multiple perspectives, regardless of where they are, right, and kind of thinking bigger about it. That's going to make it easier for them to respond to whatever they're faced with.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's actually look at the sources here. We're not going to read the sources just because that would take forever and whatnot.
Wait, that's the whole reason I thought we were doing this. I thought you were going to read them and Alfonso was going to translate them, and you know, I was going to respond. So.
Yeah. Oh, good grief. No,
I already have notes. Brandon said I had to translate, so I've written them all out, and I did it. I hand wrote them.
I know. I'm so sorry. I ruined your night. Anyway, I want to just talk about ways to approach the sources, particularly, you know, in a time setting with some teachers here as they're looking for suggestions. I mean, look at this. I mean, this is a decent amount of text here. We can really talk about the visual ones in particular, but I mean, that's a lot of text for kids to get through. So let's say you get, you know, a source like this, like source A. I kind of wish that the first source was always a visual. I'm not going to lie, because that kind of like lowers the affective filter a little bit, where it's like, okay, I can just look at this and try to see what this does for the prompt, but it is what it is. Anyway, so I'm looking at source A. What are we doing with this to help kids get through this on test day? Besides the fact, like I said, I have my kids, you know, put the ideas up front and then read for the ideas and put the source letter next to it. What are your suggestions, Alfonso and Brandon, to kind of have this amount of text and still try to get things to kind of help you understand what's going on?
I
encourage kids to go ahead, Alfonso. You go.
Back to your idea, actually, both of y'all who said that, you know, that your kids have to have a position going into this, right? After reading the prompt, you establish a position. I think Tim, you said that, right?
Yeah.
Have them, you know, think about what their argument is going to be, just flat out, right? And that helps them read through the source material, right? Because now automatically you're looking for evidence that can support your argument that you already have hopefully written down, right? You know, this is my position is, and I'll tell my kids, right? My position is, I don't care if you use it or not, but you're gonna write it down, because that's gonna help you guide your reading, right? Now it becomes purposeful reading, right? Where you're actually searching for things that can help you make the argument, right? So it's when you encounter any of these sources, that's thing one, right? That you're looking for the evidence, you're tying it. Again, you're already looking for how you're going to tie it to your argument, right? To your thesis. Okay. So then I use this thing that I stole from Eva Arce. You guys know Eva, you know, about an impact, the impact chart, right? What kind of impact does this piece of evidence have, right? Is it financial? Is it ethical? Is it technology? Is it time? You know, all of these things that immediately helps you think about commentary, right?
Yeah.
What do I have to say about this piece of evidence? Oh, here's this thing, right? I found it. Here's a piece of evidence. I want to use it. What do I have to say about it, right? So if you think about impact, Now you're thinking about how you're going to explain that, right? How is it important to my argument? How does it support, right? Why have I chosen this piece of evidence? Well, it's because this, and this, and this, right? It feeds into the idea of sustainability. It feeds into the idea of automation versus sustainability, right? So already you're actually developing your argument as you read.
And
that's great because one of the things, say it again, Tim, because I cut you off.
I said inefficiency and economics. Like it's very easy to produce the commentary around that then, but Brandon, back to you. Yeah,
no, what we're talking about here with ideas, I want to make sure that everybody who's watching understands our approach here, because a lot of people don't. Like, we're not focusing on the topic. We're focusing on the ideas related to the topic. And that's the idea. The way that I like to put it is that the argument is always about something bigger. If you've ever walked into a space where people are fighting or are arguing about something, not like physically fighting, but it's escalated to where they're yelling at each other. You'll sometimes hear it on TV shows or whatever. They'll say, wait, what's this really about? And that's the thing. This isn't about vertical farming. This is about sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. And so with that, and students accessing these sources, the things that I do with students, and this is total test taking strategy, is have the idea, just like you guys talked about, but then skim the source. And often you can look at the title in the box and things and get a feel for this. What's the perspective of that source? Is it going to support you, or are you going to have to counter it? Hit each one of those sources and then go back to those sources and read them, not in depth. You don't have time to analyze them all, but read them and find something you can use from each one. Now, that doesn't mean you have to use all 6 or 7 in the writing that you do, but find something you could use and then start crafting your essay, organizing your essay, whatever. Another thing that I started doing just this last year, and students and teachers really responded well to it, and I used to do it in my classroom some, and I got some good returns on it. How many essays, and Alfonso, you said you were a question leader for synthesis, so I want you to tell me about this. How many essays did we read that were only using the first 3 or 4 sources? And so I encourage students to maybe not start with source A, maybe go to the last source and start looking closely at that. And so they may have the opportunity to have an essay with a little bit of a different tilt on it than other essays. Possibly. I'm not saying that's going to matter. Their argument still has to be central. The development of their argument has to be central. Their line of reasoning and how the evidence that they pull from the argument, from the sources, has to support the line of reasoning that justifies the claim. All that stuff has to matter. But if yours stands out as being a little bit different, that may get you a second look, is what I'm thinking. So I'd love to know what you all think about that. If you have any ideas on it.
That's not a bad idea, and I think kind of the progression of synthesis, right, through the years. I think whatever you can do, and again, as Brandon is saying, as long as you remember that the argument is central, that all of these factors, your line of reasoning has to matter, has to make sense, has to be supported by, as long as you keep that, right, whatever it is that you can do that can really put a different, as Brandon said, put a different tilt on it, that's gold, right? Because it can be, right? Let's not say it is. Let's say it can be, right? If crafted, if put together, right, the right way, right? So that's kind of where you can be right and wrong, right? Where you put the argument together the right way, right? With the evidence, with the explanation that supports a line of reasoning that is discussing these ideas, right? In your thesis, all of that has to happen, and all of that matters. If you do that with these kind of different, with a different perspective, that can absolutely help you, right? So that's, I think that's a good idea for them to, again, especially with our struggling readers, especially our readers who are going to have issues with getting through the reading itself, right? To kind of have that in their back pocket. That's not a bad thing at all.
Now, just for the sake of time, because you're going to want to shift to prop 2 in just a minute, I do want to look at one of these questions that's in the chat here. And what happens is this. The question was asked, what tips or tricks do we have to help kids develop the deeper understandings? And then it said, if I give them a list of ideas, they do great, but they have a hard time coming up with ideas themselves. I'm going to answer the prompt one. And then Alfonso, I'm going to just ask that you clarify what see it actually means super quick. And then what we'll do is I'm going to bring up one more struggle that my students had with this particular prompt, and we'll shift over to prompt 2. But for me, when you give kids a list of ideas, that's all well and good. But what I teach my kids to do is to actually find ideas in the prompt, or they'll find words that relate to ideas. So if I were to go back up top here, like I said, my kids are going to read this, and as they read, they are going to look at efficient use of land and water. So they're going to think about sustainability and efficiency.
Can I interject, Tim?
Yep.
So the thing that you're doing right now that I think may make the difference, and I've noticed this when I'm coaching teachers in their classrooms and things, is sometimes teachers will do it and then they'll tell the kids to go and do it. Tim is doing it, modeling right now, but then what Tim would do, because Tim and I have talked about this, is he would then ask kids, okay, what other ideas are you all seeing?
Yeah.
He starts trying to get them to think about that way, that releasing the responsibility to them and then doing this often. So I want to point that out, that what Tim is doing here, it wouldn't just be him. He would involve students in that. Right, Tim?
Right.
Okay.
And actually what I do is I always model it first with a different prompt, and then I make them do it. So then another one, my kids would look at energy consumption. And so they'd circle that, and then that's where they would write sustainability and energy consumption. And the last one that they would probably do is they would look at nutritional value. So they would see cost, and they could do economics here, but nutritional value. And most of my kids would actually write the word health there. And so they've created these ideas themselves so that they know what to really look for themselves. But Alfonso, you have another way that Eva brought up. And why don't you just articulate what that see it stands for, and then after that I'll talk about one more struggle my kids had, and then we'll go from there to prompt number 2.
Already mentioned, Tim, in terms of helping kids generate ideas, and in this sense, right, you're generating ideas to shape your argument around, and what the chart helps you do. And there's several iterations of it, but it works, right? Because it helps kids really think about immediately generating commentary and explanation, right? And again, as I said, what do I have to say about this piece of evidence, right? Mm-hmm. How does this piece of evidence help me prove my point, right? Well, this statistic, this figure, this, this fact, right, applies to the economic idea of, and a lot of these are combined, right? Is it economically sustainable, right? Yeah. Does it impact economics and health, right? So that's really where I want to get them, is to kind of combine these ideas, right? So it starts with, it's the dollar sign, right, is economics, right? Financial concerns, safety, and then it's the E is, education, right? And we have a lot of these acronyms, right? The REHUGO and a bunch of these. Yeah. But this approach, I think, really helps them focus on that, generating that commentary, right? Which is one of the things, and as we know, the focal point for the teaching, the focal point for the evaluation of the writing in this case is about that commentary, right? Is about how they explain their argument. And what I tell my kids is that in the commentary, right, in what you have to say about the evidence, in how you connect the evidence to your thesis, that's the only place your actual argument happens, right? Yeah. That's the only place it can happen. So the more you can focus on that, and the better you do that, the better your argument's going to be, right? That enduring understanding
for the course. You know, the enduring understandings get overlooked, you know, all too easily. But that enduring understanding about reasoning and evidence says that evidence supports the reasoning that justifies a claim. And
Yes.
that is, people may not think much about that. And they say, oh yeah, I always teach that evidence supports the claim. No, that's not what that says. That says that evidence supports the reasoning that justifies the claim. Right. And that is different than what we teach kids. And we say, oh, well, you got to have evidence to support your claim. And then we kind of get upset with them. We wonder, well, why aren't they providing me more commentary? Well, they've done exactly what we've asked them to do. They've given us evidence. It supports their claim.
Yep.
But we haven't asked them or instructed them to develop and explain it just the way you did, Alfonso. I mean, you said it perfectly. So that's what this is testing. This synthesis question is testing that. It's not testing research. I mean, I'd love to have them develop a thesis and then go out and do some research and see if they have to revise it. We don't have time.
Be careful
Right,
what you wish for.
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to just drop a link in the chat, and also I removed some students that were being ridiculous in there. So just be aware, folks, that I am trying to monitor that and listen to Brandon and Alfonso. But there's a little Quizlet right here that actually has the references of what SIA is, which is what Alfonso was referring to in terms of connecting things with commentary, right? So if we put our evidence in, we could say, how do we provide commentary on this in relation to the economics of the issue? Or how do we provide commentary in relation to the time, like the timing of the issue, or commentary in relation to? So you can go there. I can't remember what it is because I don't use all the parts of SIA for that. But Eva made that. It was incredible and awesome and amazing. As I scroll to the second question, and we look at that prompt and addressing it and whatnot, one of the things that my students actually, I had one student in particular who's a very good student tell me that her problem with this particular essay and the prompt wasn't about its accessibility. She said it was plenty accessible. She said the only problem that I had was I could not envision what a vertical farm looked like. And she just wanted a picture. Now I know that it's defined right on that first page, which talks about, like, you know, stacked,
Shelves.
and yeah, shelves of plants. But I think that she really wanted to kind of picture it outside of what a greenhouse looks like. And I don't think that most kids know what hydroponic growing looks like, as plants are actually just put into drilled in PVC pipes, and their roots are just tossed in there as the water flows through. So that was one thing that she told me. She said that was my biggest struggle in accessing that particular one, was not being able to visualize it. And what's also interesting for me is when I think about these kind of like skyscrapers of farms, I remember reading an article a few years back about how they were considering even doing that with beef, like putting cows in skyscrapers and then just setting their feed through a trough and then just cleaning out their waste, and just on layers and levels all the way up. And that was the nature of urban farming at that point. And all I could picture once again was Brave New World.
I can't handle that. Nope.
Yeah.
Not my thing. Yep.
Yeah.
That is brave. That's totally Brave New World.
Yeah. You know,
Yikes.
so nonetheless, would that would be the nature of it. So let's actually move to number 2. Okay. And we've got our prompt here for number 2. Let's talk about how we would access the prompt. Then we'll actually read it. We'll talk about the choices and message and purpose and things like that. So we have on May 21st, 2016, the poet Rita Dove delivered a commencement address to the graduating students at the University of Virginia at Charlottesville, where she was a professor of English at the time. Dove received a Pulitzer Prize for her poetry and served as the United States Poet Laureate from 1993 to 1995. She also writes in a variety of genres, including fiction and drama. The following is an excerpt from her speech. Read the passage carefully. Write an essay that analyzes the rhetorical choices Dove makes to convey her message about what she wishes for her audience of graduating students. All right, what are we doing with this prompt here, Brandon and Alfonso, before we get into the reading to help prepare us to do this the right way?
Don't miss the message, right? Kind of centering on that idea, once again, kind of digging out those ideas, right? This message about what she wishes for her audience, right? That is the what, right? And again, as Brandon was saying earlier, what is this really about? Right. And you want kids to ask that question still, because that gets them to, kind of a better analysis. Right. And again, right, much like with the synthesis and with the argument, moves them away from simply providing evidence. Right. Everything we've tried to do the program has tried to do with rhetorical analysis and moving it away, right, from that, here's that thing, here's that thing, here's that thing, here's that thing.
The treasure hunt, right?
Is exactly that, right? Is how do we get kids to write about the ideas that are here, right, and how this particular speaker writer is conveying those ideas, right? And short of an evaluative, right, this is great, this is not great, right, because that's a lot more subjective. Go from the evidence that we have, which is the text, right? But what is that text saying about these bigger ideas, right? So in terms of kind of looking at this prompt and saying, okay, so what are these wishes and why is she wishing that? Right. That's what you want them to think. Right. And then, so, hey, and how is she conveying that? Right. So, but getting them quickly to those bigger ideas, once again, will help them get a deeper reading, right? Where they're not just saying, oh, there's that metaphor and there's that simile and there's repetition or repetition, as we too often see.
Oh, repetition is all I get. You bet.
Right. And they use repetition to achieve their purpose. Yay. But when they start with these bigger ideas, they're looking for something different, right, already. And that always generates a more interesting conversation about the text.
I want them first, I'm going to be really happy with the student who gives me just a statement that says the writer uses syntax and diction. I mean, if I get that, that's the highest level of thesis that I think I could possibly get, And of course, I'm kidding. I see Alfonso wondering, like, well, where's Brandon going with this? Yeah, because we want to avoid those, finger. You guys were talking about the treasure hunt. I call it battleship sometimes, where we put eggs in the holes and boom, I sink your battleship. But it's about situational awareness too. The prompts almost always give students enough of the rhetorical situation that if we've practiced it with our students, before we even read the text, giving them some background. Tim, I think about the textbook we did with Greta Thunberg. Before we do Greta's angry speech, give that intro and say, okay, what are the ideas that we know are going to come up here? It's a graduation speech. What ideas do we expect to come up? And if they come up, great, we've got something we can grab on. If they don't come up, maybe there's some irony. I don't know. And so we can play with that a little bit, and that students are already thinking about those ideas before they get into the passage. But then the passage also, and I will say in the language course, question 2, the rhetorical analysis, the passage always gives you ideas. It always has ideas in the passage you can grab a hold of and use in your essays to talk about those things relative to what's being analyzed.
Yeah. Right. And, I love the idea of that commencement address because, when you think about, well, what is the commencement address actually for? It's to encourage. So, even though this is a little bit of a different way to do so, it's always about, hey, we're going to encourage you to go out there. And so nonetheless, I really love that idea of just like picking up on that. And Alfonso, you really nailed it, because as I have my kids go through and pick out background information and make sure that they can know that they get what they're given, as I make my kids create that question at the very end. And Brandon, this is the same thing that I did yesterday with Lit. You create the question to get the idea first and move backwards. So my students are going to get here and they're going to say, okay, what can't I know from the word to the end of the sentence? And they're going to say, what is her message about what she wishes for her audience? So they need to figure out, what does she wish for her audience and what is their message about that? And now if they can understand that when they're done, they can then say, where are 3 pieces of text that allow me to know this is what she wishes for her audience? It's here, it's here, and it's here. And then all they have to do is say, here's what she's doing in that text. And so they go backwards, as opposed to what Alfonso was talking about was the typical treasure hunt where they go forwards, where it's like, I'm going to find the alliteration, but I don't necessarily know how it relates to the message. And what we want the kids to do is to work backwards, get that idea, get that message about what she wishes for her audience. So what does she actually wish for her audience? Okay, now where do we find that? And what can we say are some of her choices? So, all right, I'm going to read this here, and then we can go through and just try to pick out some of the things that we could talk about if we were kids. And then we'll finish up with a discussion of question 3 with the last probably about 10 minutes that we have. So here we go.
Well, you know my thing. Before you read, I'm going to say,
Yep.
I want everybody to think, because what's your favorite paragraph? What's your favorite sentence?
That's right. Always.
You know,
Favorite
that's my
paragraph.
thing. Always favorite paragraph, favorite sentence, because that's where you can start.
Yes. And that's actually a great technique for class, right? That's one of the ways to get your kids actually paying attention while you read. If you're the teacher who's reading, holding them accountable, favorite paragraph, favorite sentence. And then they have to actually articulate why. That's a great thing.
We're reading that out loud, and we get to the end of it and said, okay, you guys have 2-3 minutes, turn and talk. What paragraph, what sentence, why? And they know I'm going to cold call them. And I'm talking about my college students or my high school students. I'm going to cold call them. So they better have something picked out, and they better have, even if it's the thinnest thing, as to why. Go ahead, Tim. I'm sorry.
All right. No, we're good. I'm extremely delighted to be here today at the very institution where I've been teaching for the past 27 years. Although I've given commencement speeches before, this one is different. This is personal. The job of a commencement speaker, I Googled it, so it must be true, is to dispense life advice. That seems the very opposite of Percy Bysshe Shelley's definition of the poet as a nightingale who sits in darkness and sings to cheer its own solitude with sweet sounds. So I will not give you advice. The last thing you want to hear is advice, because in order to be effective, advice must be specific, and that obviously is impossible in this setting. So instead of advice, I will give you wishes. Just think of me as a contrary fairy godmother or a wily genie. I wish you hunger. Of course, I don't mean physiological want, but a continued spiritual and intellectual appetite. A hunger to know more, do more, feel more. When I told my graduate poetry writing class that I was giving this speech, I asked them what they wished they had heard at their baccalaureate exercises. And one young woman responded with a list of, as she put it, some things I wish I could have heard if I had sense enough to listen. 1, life is short. 2, don't put yourself in a box. 3, there's a reason certain people, places, books, ideas, etc. make our ears stand up. Always follow what attracts you. And number 4, which to me is the kicker. 4, passions are hard to come by. When you entered this university, you wanted to eat the world, and all everyone else wanted you to do was get good grades. And though your dreams may have been more nebulous than they are now, they were no less intense. So keep that hunger, nurse it, stay curious, want it all while it lasts. I wish you hard work. By what I mean, by that, I don't mean backbreaking labor, not the drudgery of the treadmill, but an appreciation for the work that comes before the big show. Getting ready, honing your tools, observation, research, practice. The actress Lupita Nyong'o gives herself homework wherever she has an audition. The classical flautist James Galway says you can sight read better if you know your scales in arpeggios. When my father sat me down for the "You're going out into the world" talk, his message was this: always be 150% prepared. At 150%, you'll be ready for anything, even if you're not chosen for a job or position, although you're the better qualified candidate. As the first African-American research chemist to break the color barrier in the tire and rubber industry, my father knew how it felt to be passed over. What he was trying to tell me was the last person to hold you accountable is you yourself. In most cases, you won't be asked for more than 75%. In fact, depending on your race and gender, you might not expect it to be given more than 50% of your capacity. But only you will know if you've done your best. So focus on that rather than what others think your best is. Because if you allow others to tell you your worth, you will have given up on yourself. For me, a shy kid who trembled giving class presentations in high school, The 150% I had not ever expected to need came in handy when I received the phone call that I had been awarded the Pulitzer Prize and would have to hold my first press conference. 6 years later, when I was named Poet Laureate of the United States, that 150% emboldened me to write a letter on this university's letterhead to then President-elect Clinton, suggesting that the White House spotlight the arts during Arts and Humanities Month. And in October of that year, 1993, as my husband and I rushed to Pennsylvania Avenue right after my inaugural poetry reading at the Library of Congress to join the White House celebration and state dinner in the honor of the arts and humanities, I used every bit of that 150%. I wish you uncertainty. There is only so much knowledge that can be taught. Hard facts are just that, solid, dense entities, the stones in a swiftly flowing stream of possibilities. You cannot wait for revelation to come down upon you in a cloud of gossamer and angelic sighs. More often than not, you have to seek it out. Sometimes you don't know where you're going, but the only way you'll find out is if you get going. That doesn't mean that you rush off willy-nilly screaming, I'm going to conquer this world, but you do need to be bold enough to step outside of your comfort zone, even if it's scary out there. All right, Alfonso and Brandon, take it away. We are thinking about what does she wish for her audience and what is her message?
Well, very well read, first off. Nice work. Second, I'll add my favorite sentence starts on line 63. Can you scroll down to it?
Yep, 63 you said, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right.
Got it.
Yep, right there. So really, it's two sentences. I'm cheating, but it's my own rules, so I can break them. It starts at 59. It says, in most cases, you won't be asked for more than 75%, semicolon. In fact, depending on your race and gender, you might not be expected to give more than 50% of capacity. But, and there we see a big but, right?
Yep.
Only you will know if you've done your best. So focus on that rather than what others think your best is. You know, so she's talking about at the beginning, she's not going to give advice. She has wishes for you, but this is her advice. And the rest of the next two paragraphs are really revolving around this. And that's why I love it, because it really does capture. And so, Tim, it kind of goes back to what you and I were talking about with the literature last night, you know, pushing students to make sure that they say something, they write something about the last paragraph or two of a passage, because that's really going to get them into, likely get them into more of the complexity or at least the purpose of the text as a whole. So that's where I am with it.
Yeah, that's an absolute mandate for me. Whenever my kids do any type of analysis, literary or rhetorical, whatever their last body paragraph is, and sometimes they only are able to get through 2 body paragraphs, no problem. But the last body paragraph, hopefully they do 3, the last one in a time setting at least, they have to have something from the end of the piece, from the last. Luckily, it's different with literature. Literature, you can always say within the last 3 sentences. With rhetoric, I could typically make it the last paragraph. But nonetheless, something has to be there. Alfonso, what about you?
Well, I mean, you guys nailed it. This is definitely, you know, most everything you said is important. But I think the most important thing is that the author uses ethos.
Oh yeah, that's right. I think I saw the ethos in. I think I saw the ethos in line 33, didn't I? Isn't there ethos in line 33?
I was thinking about how it was pulling on my heartstrings, Alfonso.
I'm telling you, it's all of those things and then some.
Yeah,
I believe I've seen that in a few essays. It uses ethos and then some. But
you know, I do think about as we read these essays, you know, what are the things in it that students are going to, you know, if they are labeling devices, what are they going to label? And you know, we're going to see parallel structure, we're going to see metaphors, of course, you know, maybe some allusions to popular culture,
right,
and so on.
But I think a lot of that does have to do with not only the writer's own credibility, right? Because I think she uses that very effectively, right? And the fact that she, from the very beginning, right? This university where I've taught for 27 years, right? I've been here. I know this place, right? That's credibility, right? That's their personal authority, right, to speak to people graduating from this school. And then, of course, her accomplishments, right, also contributes to that. The fact that she refers to not only her father, which is a big piece of it, right, in terms of what she's talking about, right, and what she's wishing, right, because I know this. I have a personal connection to a person who gave 150% and then told me to give 150%, right? I have these other figures, right? Kids are going to know who Lupita is, right? So that's, again, all of these things kind of build that, hey, I should listen to this person and their wishes for me, right? So it's because I like when kids kind of latch on to this, going back to that concept of big idea, right? We talk about how this speaker develops that, authority and that, care for these, these graduates helps, right? Absolutely helps her deliver this message, right, about what she wishes, right? So that's what I kind of like kids to kind of latch on to those bigger things, right? And then again, it's a much more fluent conversation then about what's happening in the passage.
Right.
And I think you've heard me say, I love it, I love it, I love it multiple times, because what you're really showing, Alfonso, and I know you know this, I just want to point out to everybody listening is, you made that comment about ethos. We have students who say, well, here's the ethos. And I'm like, well, but you're talking about ethos as an effect, because it's not a thing. I can't just put my finger on ethos, but I can put my finger on things in the text that create that ethos.
Right.
And see ethos as an effect. And that is what we got to be doing. And I love it.
And in the classroom too, Brandon, when kids talk about ethos, I always make them actually tell me what the credibility is. So when they say it makes her credible, well, I'm going to say, okay, well, wait, what is it here? It's her credibility as someone who knows the institution. Then it becomes her credibility as someone who's gone out in the world and conquered. Then we have her credibility as someone who's actually come from modest means in particular, right? And has been able to go out there and get them. And all of this is actually meant to humanize her, because let's be real. They know she's a professor. They know she's the poet laureate. They know that she is a big deal. And she really is humanizing the process of becoming a big deal, right?
Yeah.
And so I really—
It's a great way to say it, Tim. I love that statement. She's humanizing the process of becoming a big deal. I mean, that's awesome. Well said.
Yeah.
And think about that as having kids approach this from that big idea perspective, right? Yeah. And then, so now you're talking about something completely different, right? But you're still, focused on the text, right? What the text is doing. Well, this is what it's doing, right? It's not simply using this, and this, right? It's establishing this idea of, who this person is and why she cares, and, all of these different layers. And again, that kind of conversation about this text, that's a much deeper analysis, right? That's going to work better for kids. And again, if we teach kids to approach it that way, right, it's much easier for them to do it. And that's kind of the natural way they do it, instead of, the other way. We're talking about the backwards way to do it, right? So here's this, and here's that. That way it's harder to get to, right? Now, how do I take all of these things up to this big idea? When I start the other way, I say, well, how do these things develop this big idea, right? They're already thinking that way. And that's much more fluid, right? It's much more fluent.
And when you think about what she wishes for her audience, what she's really wishing for them here is she's wishing for them to develop a personal ambition. And that personal ambition will lead to the same success that she had. So in the most non-narcissistic terms, she's basically saying, hey, you can be like me. And I don't mean that in, like I said, narcissistic terms. And as we think about that message, that's why your comment about ethos pulls in so nicely here. I want to just make one little point here is the consistent inclusion of ironic statements, right? When she says, I wish you hunger and I wish you hard work and I wish you uncertainty, right? she doesn't actually wish any of those things at the face value, right? So we've got this consistent verbal irony. Now, I think that a lot of kids want to say things like, oh, she uses verbal irony. But really, I want my kids to actually identify what she's doing. She's repeating ironic statements. And that's going to be—
Irony is an effect. It is, you can't put your finger on irony. Right.
Right. And so because of that, I want kids to recognize the statements that are ironic and then say why, right? And these are the shock factors here. I wish you hunger. Like who says that? Hey, I hope you go hungry tonight, but then she qualifies it, right? And when she qualifies these things, she actually qualifies her care, which goes straight back to her character in terms of pushing for ambition.
Yeah. And I mean, I think the only other thing I would point out with this is asking students to look at complexity and tension that goes along with this. Tim kind of touches on it with the irony bit. But going back to what Alfonso was saying as well, along with what Tim was saying, if we usually think inductively, like it would be nice if we all thought deductively, like we all thought about our premises and came to a conclusion,
right.
But a lot of times we'll have an idea of, okay, how did I get there? And that's what we want students to do with this. Like we wanted to read it and say, okay, here's something. Now go back. What in this can I put my finger on that is supporting that? And so we're actually, when we teach it that way, we're supporting the thinking that most of us do on a daily basis anyway. Right. And that's really, students are much more comfortable with it, I've noticed.
Right.
So, but we need to move on. I know.
But that is true. But think about it in these terms. When kids make judgments about other kids all the time and their motivations, they already have the judgment of the motivation. And then they're like, well, here's how I know. Right.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
All right. So so-and-so's a jerk. You've got the idea out there. Well, where's the evidence for that? And what did the person do that then qualified the jerk? If that's how we naturally think, let's get kids to think about rhetorical analysis passages that way. And that's why we've been talking about getting this idea out there. Now, as we move to number 3, I got to just make a quick little plug here real quick for teachers. Please note that the Garden of English does run Garden of English summer workshops for AP English teachers, both lit and lang. Brandon takes care of all of our literature teacher work. There were 3 weeks that are offered for that. 2 of them are daytime, and then 1 of them is evening. And the evening one is always the first week of August, particularly for teachers who just find out that they're going to be teaching AP.
We say that they found out today they're teaching AP tomorrow. So,
right. I teach the lang ones, and there are plenty of I shouldn't say teach. I should say I facilitate. There are plenty of benefits that come with this, like free AMSCO books and plenty of cool stuff from Marco Learning and Parlay and Applied Practice. Marco Learning actually gives us 90 pages of completely course and exam description aligned lesson plans to just give our participants.
Awesome.
So if you're really, really new, Marco has all of this stuff prepared, and they let us just give it all away to our participants like that. And Parlay has awesome stuff too. So just note that is there. If you want to sign up for those, just go to thegardenofenglish.com and click on summer workshops. And then if you're interested in the evening sessions, which are shorter, but they still cover mostly the same content, they just have less activity time. By all means, give us a shout out and sign up, and hopefully we'll see you this summer. Now, I'm going to go back to the prompts. Let's finish up with our argument prompt here, and we'll call it a day. We'll probably spend about 10 minutes on this here because it's a nice little short argument prompt as we think about approaching it. All right. Question 3, argument. In a 2018 interview about the importance of collaboration, then United States Representative Carlos Curbelo stated, if you're trying to convince someone that they need to get involved in an issue or perhaps change their thinking on an issue, trying to scare them is not always effective and can actually sow resentment. Write an essay that argues your position on the extent to which Curbelo's claim about persuading others is valid. All right, how are we approaching this prompt here, Brandon and Alfonso? And then what can I do for my kids throughout the school year to help them build evidence banks to be able to respond to prompts like this?
Language, right? And we've of course, we've all seen the memes out there floating around, right? He was wrong. He was totally wrong. He was so wrong. He was, completely wrong. He's just dumb. Well, he actually says it's not always effective, right? So right there, right? We got to pay attention to that. So paying attention to the context, right? Paying attention to the topic, right? Such as it is, kind of being careful with it. And then we can more carefully craft a response, right? His claim about persuading others, right? Now, the extent to which that is valid, right?
Yeah.
So it's real easy to go with that idea of scaring people, right? Because again, that's a lot of the context we live in. But again, a more nuanced approach, a more careful approach to the language of this kind of gives you some better ideas, and again, encourages you to have a better conversation about it, right? So it gives you more perspectives.
What I love about what you mentioned there, Alfonso, is the idea of teaching kids during the school year to look for elements of nuance in the prompt. Because when it says not always, when the kids are like, he's wrong, scaring people is a great thing or something, or highly effective. Well, guess what? You can actually write that here because he says not always. So that would imply that there are times when it is actually effective. So you could say that he's right, even though you're disagreeing with part of that, And so really getting kids to kind of focus on those nuanced moments. But we got to teach that during the school year as opposed to the day before the exam, because kids have to be ready to get in there to jump into the nuance and have that practice. Because otherwise they're like, crud, I've got 35 minutes left. I better read this quick. All right. This guy says, don't scare people. All right, let's go, or it's bad or, whatever. And it becomes oversimplified.
Yep. That's it. That's the word. That's the key word, right? And that's, I think, what we see in a lot of the weaker essays at the reading is that they've oversimplified the prompt, right? And that's the danger here, right? So
sometimes it's not their fault. Sometimes they've been taught into that.
Yes,
that's absolutely right.
And granted, there are those kids. We all have taught those kids that oversimplifying it is the only way they can access it.
Yep.
So we understand teachers sometimes, just to get the kid to finish an essay, they've got to oversimplify it. You do that, all right? That's their level of success. But if there are lots of students that need to be pushed and can be pushed to complicate the issue. I cut you off, Alfonso. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I think what would you you said there was absolutely spot on. In that, helping kids to, again, as Tim was mentioning earlier, during the course of the school year, this is what we're teaching kids to do, right? Going back to our see it chart, right? Eva's ears must be burning tonight. This is again a place to use it, right? Because I asked my kids, okay, let's go to this chart. What kind of evidence can you come up with that addresses these issues, right? What is this about, right? Again, that bigger question. How do we address these issues? Because again, at the same time that they're thinking about examples based on the chart, they already have to decide what they're going to say about it, right?
Yeah.
How am I going to develop this? What's my commentary going to be? Okay, this is an economic issue. Okay, what does that mean, right? How do you develop that, right? I have this example. I have this historical example, right? Well, it's a good thing, therefore MLK. Right? Or it's a bad thing, therefore it's Hitler, right? Kind of thing. But okay, what about it? What's the impact, right?
Yeah.
And that again immediately gets them to, okay, what do I have to say? And it says, I have this example. I don't know if I have anything to say. Let's move on, right?
Yeah.
I need something else. I need something better. So.
One of the things that I would make my kids do is when they get to this prompt, they would go to the word argues and go to the end. And then they would actually say, what can't I know again? And they would say, okay, what is Curbello's claim? So they have to be able to articulate what his claim about persuading others is. And then they have to ask, to what extent is it valid? And what I would have my kids do as we practice in class is right underneath this, they'd write out those questions. What is his claim about persuading others? To what extent is it valid? And then they would draw what would look like a timeline, but it's actually a percentage line from 0% to 100. And I would say, put a dot on the validity of this claim based on what you think in relation to this. And wherever they put that dot, and they're not allowed to be 50-50. That is the one rule. You cannot put it in the middle. Let's say it's 75-25 in favor of it. I'm like, good, your thesis needs to be worded with a subordinating conjunction that conveys that you are more in favor, or vice versa. And so I'm teaching the complexity with just that little line. And then they have to then learn what a complex sentence is and how to construct it to create their thesis.
I just need to leave now. I'm so worked up because you're talking about sentence grammar and the importance of it rhetorically. And I'm like, oh, I gotta go. I'm like, yeah, like but I mean, you all know me. You all know my sessions and things. And I'm like, teach more sentences. Please teach more sentences. Because if you're teaching sentences, you're teaching thinking. If you're teaching complex sentences, you're teaching complex thought. And so, you know, the most important thing that Tim just articulated, I want everyone to know it, is that, yes, on the rubric, kids are probably going to get credit for saying Curbello's claim is not valid. That's a claim.
Yep.
But that does not set up a strong essay.
No.
And that does not show depth of thought. And so students need to be able to articulate Curbello's claim without just restating it. They need to be able to articulate it and then articulate a position on it, not just claim that it is valid. And so in my classroom, I would push students, and the teachers I work with, I say, you know, in your classroom, you don't have to give that point. You give them half a point. They got to write a good thesis to get the full point, like a fully developed. And I'm not arguing with the College Board rubric because I know what the college expectations are. Okay, for a 40-minute essay, things like that. I'm not arguing with it. I think that basic thesis rubric is right because students have to be able to make a claim and defend it. But if I can get students to use that thesis statement almost as an outline for their essay, then they're going to address the claim. They're also going to address the bigger ideas that are at hand and be able to then spin out an essay that is much more effective than one that just tells me that this is valid or invalid.
Now, I want to bring up one more part about the prompt when it comes to evidence. Alfonso, did I cut you off? I'm sorry. Were you about to say something?
No.
Okay.
I was going to say that this is very, very, very similar, if not exactly the same as what we said about the synthesis prompt, right? Where you have to have that big idea, you have to have that position, right? Going into the reading. In this case, you have to have those things going into selecting your own evidence, right? It's the same process.
And when it comes to selecting your own evidence, one of the things that I teach my kids at the beginning of the year, now I do a lot of things to kind of help them build an evidence bank. One of the things that I started doing this year was every 3 weeks, they had to write 2 stories. They had to respond to 4 different prompts with 2 different responses in 3 to 5 sentences. So that's a total of 20 sentences in total if they maximize things. I'm sorry, 2 times 4, that's going to be 8 times 40 sentences. And one of them was, what are the 2 most impactful moments of your life? What are the 2 most impactful moments in the lives of other people that you know? What are the 2 most impactful moments in any media that you've ever experienced? And what are the most impactful moments of history? So I made the kids keep those logs. And then the day before the exam, they took all of them out and I said, bring them home and read them, because I promise you will have evidence out the wazoo for anything. But if that doesn't happen for a kid, you want to teach them how to read the prompt and let them read about themselves, because kids could talk about themselves just fine and typically do okay in terms of producing an argument, because that's what we're looking for. Can kids argue? And I just want to look at this part where it says, if you're trying to convince someone that they need to get involved with an issue or perhaps change their thinking on an issue, all I need my students to do is say, when was the last time I allowed someone to change my own mind? Like, think about it. And then, good, I want you to think of 2 examples. Those are your examples. What was it that made them do that? Was it the fact that they threatened you? Or was it the fact that they produced some really solid evidence and you were like, crud, maybe I've been wrong. And then because of that, you felt like you changed your own mind, but that person actually changed it for you. And so if kids can engage with the prompt that way, they could do something. Sorry, Brandon.
No, you're fine. I'm sorry. What I was going to say is, I'm going to do to you exactly what we're doing in this prompt. So what's this really about? What Tim is really saying is that we English majors, me, you, Alfonso, others, we tend to over academize things. And we really want it to be about intro to composition for every every college freshman. And so think about, when has somebody changed your mind? like Tim says.
Yeah.
And so that's what it's got to be about. And students can absolutely write about those things. They can absolutely engage those things. Yeah.
Even think about last year's question, which hopefully nobody here wrote it because I really hated it. So last year's argument question, and if one of you wrote it, please forgive me, about the quick and timely decisions. When kids were flipping out about that, I just asked my students after, I just said, well, when have you ever made a quick decision and what was the outcome? And they were like, it typically sucks. And I'm like, good. When do you feel like you've actually made a timely decision? And then what's been the outcome? And I've had kids, that were like, well, I thought I made a timely decision, but then I realized that I could have made a better one later. But most kids are like, I had all the information that I could have going there, and then I actually ended up getting the shoes that I wanted or something like that, just something silly and ridiculous, but that actually helps. It will work if you allow kids to actually put themselves in the prompt. Now, once again, is that the most academic paper that you're going to get? Probably not. But I had an argument paper last year that used My Little Pony as decent evidence in the argument. And you know what?
Yep.
We scored the paper just fine. The kid didn't get a 141. But so really encourage kids to kind of access what they can within the prompt and teach them that throughout the year. And then say,
I was lucky enough to have Wendell Berry as my writing professor at University of Kentucky. And, I didn't realize at the time how lucky I was, but I look back on it now and wish I'd asked more questions. But I remember one time I was just stuck, and I know lots of people have said this throughout history, but I'll always remember it straight from Wendell Berry's mouth, because he said, Mr. Abden, just write what you know.
Yeah.
He said, that's all you've got. And it's absolutely true. And if we encourage that of our kids, and we can inadvertently send a message to kids that what they know doesn't matter, if we tell them, oh no, that personal example is no good. I mean, that's what they got, y'all. They got to go with that.
Yeah. And one last thing that I want to just point out as we, begin to close things out here today, and Alfonso and Brandon, I'll let you have the final words, is this. If you can create a culture in your classroom where kids are actually willing to tell stories about themselves for these argument prompts, think about how lunch table conversations work. A kid comes in and groans about something that happened at home last night, and another kid's like, and then at my house, blah, blah, blah. And another kid's like, well, did you see this? And brings in the kid from across the place, and the stories grow into the universal application.
Yep.
Let's actually do that with our argument prompts. Okay. Let the kids talk about the stories, and they will organically grow into the universal application. And someone will eventually bring in an academic example. And then as a class, you tell the entire class, you're all writing this body paragraph on this example because it came out of your conversation. How does it fit? And then you have a great conversation starter. They'll realize the importance of stories. So AP literature is not stupid anymore. And then they'll also recognize the universality of how to generate examples. It's a great practice for your classroom. And the kids get very, very comfortable with each other, which allows them to be more vulnerable, which allows them to learn better.
This is why kids at the lunch table, and this is why the kids at the lunch table in high school, they'd all be talking about whatever. And I'd be like, oh, it's that time in that book when, and they look at me like I was, they look at me funny, and I'm like, because that's my point of reference, right? So,
that's right.
But Alfonso, what are you thinking as we move towards some last comments? Anything you want to leave everybody with?
Yeah, I think making these things, as Tim was just talking about, right? They're engaging with these ideas, right? Yeah. And allowing them to engage with these ideas the best way they can. Right. And that runs the gamut for our students in our classroom. We know that, right? And we can't limit that, right? So I think Tim's idea about those conversations growing organically, because that's what this is about, right? All of the argument is about conversation, right? Because you want to contribute to a conversation. Those conversations are ongoing. You want to step, but you want to say your piece, right? And you want to say, you want your piece to be meaningful, and that has to come from your own context, right? Yeah. So, you're right. Your mention of, write what you know, right? Mm-hmm. And we have to start kids with that, right? And can we build that? Of course, but for them to have that, right, as a starting point and understand, right, those, again, going back to the enduring understandings, right, that we, those were, just a humongous kind of weight, right, in terms of, how do we best do this to communicate that, right, that these understandings about argument, about reading and writing, right, are totally accessible to our students.
Yes.
We just have to get them there, right? We
Yep,
just have to get them there, right? And yes, absolutely. Some kids, it's going to be harder to do that with, but when we allow them to start from those, seemingly unimportant conversations, and none of them are unimportant, right?
Right.
Then you let them see themselves, right? And in these argument spaces, right? In these rhetorical spaces, and then these rhetorical situations become a lot less scary, right? They become a lot more accessible to more of them. And that's really, that's where the magic happens, man. That's really getting them somewhere.
My final comment, Tim, I don't know if you know this, but Alfonso's holding back on us because I have it on good authority from our common friend, Alfonso, that today is your birthday.
What?
Yeah, it is.
Happy birthday, sir.
Birthday. Actually,
Yeah,
you know what?
it
No,
is.
sorry. I'm going to Alice in Wonderland this. Brandon, happy unbirthday to you. Okay.
Very merry on birthday to you.
That's
Very
right.
merry birthday. That's nice. I like that.
Right.
Yeah, but that's how important you guys are, right?
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Thank you
That's
for
how much I
doing
love
this.
you
Appreciate
guys.
that. All
And
right.
Lily said she was going to call you, but she's not because she knows you're on this call right now. So she'll call you later, I think.
You send me a
All
funny
right.
text.
Oh,
All
great,
right.
great.
Well, listen, I really appreciate all of you. Alfonso, I'll see you in Tampa soon enough. Brandon will be on the phone probably tomorrow, the way that we talk to each other. So,
You
anyway,
said
I
that a
really
little
appreciate.
begrudgingly. Did you see that? Did I know?
No,
I kind of noticed a
I
little,
didn't mean it that way.
I saw that too.
Didn't mean it that way.
Alfonso and I will see each other at Golden, Colorado this summer. We're doing an APSI together.
yeah,
Pretty
that's gonna
psyched
be
about
fun.
that.
Enjoy.
Yeah,
Enjoy.
Yeah,
The
we will.
Colorados were always fun for me.
I know.
So all right, you all have a great one. It was nice to see you. When I shut this Zoom down, that's when the YouTube live will go off. So, but we won't be talking to each other. But I appreciate you both, and we'll be in touch.
All right,
This
guys.
was great. Thanks,
Have a
guys.
great
See
one.
y'all soon.
Bye.